Diet culture is pervasive everywhere. We even hear it in the loudest voices that talk about the way of eating that can be really helpful for people who are recovering from food addiction. But when it becomes like rhetoric, that can really get hard then to listen because we can be so easily swayed. We're so vulnerable, especially early days. I also love because it helps to build that intrinsic motivation. So, which means I'm just motivated by stuff that's inside of me versus the outside world. It's not because my doctor is saying I need to lose weight or because my significant other is like, gee, honey, you've really gotten chunky lately. Like those things are not necessarily bad motivators. I don't want to label it that way. So if you're a person who is externally motivated, that's okay. But when we learn to have that internal motivation, we actually are more likely to stick with it long term because it actually becomes like those lifestyle changes that are necessary. Those external motivations are temporary.
Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Molly. Molly is a licensed clinical professional counselor and licensed addiction counselor with a passion for helping individuals overcome the challenges of food addiction and find sustainable recovery. As a co-founder of Sweet Sobriety, an innovative online platform dedicated to ultra-processed food addiction recovery, Molly provides resources, education, and support to individuals worldwide on their journey to healing. Molly is also a prominent voice in the food addiction recovery space as a co-host of the Food Junkies podcast. On this globally recognized platform, experts, advocates, and individuals share their experiences and insights about food addiction, treatment, and recovery. Additionally, Molly co-hosts the Food Shrinks podcast, offering listeners evidence-based strategies and solutions for breaking free from the grip of ultra-processed foods. Beyond her work with clients and media, Molly is actively involved in advocacy efforts for the recognition of food addiction as a legitimate diagnosis. She serves on the committee responding to the World Health Organization's rejection of their application to recognize food addiction, contributing to research, public awareness campaigns, and professional discourse to challenge stigma and advance understanding of this issue. Molly's dedication stems from her professional expertise and her personal mission to empower others to reclaim their health and well-being. Her unique combination of clinical knowledge, advocacy, and community leadership makes her a sought-after speaker and thought leader in the food addiction recovery field. When she's not working, Molly can be found in the mountains or with her family playing Dungeons and Dragons, cribbage, or finding adventure on a random road trip. I really enjoyed my conversation with Molly, and I hope that you enjoy it too. Without further ado, here's our conversation.
Yay.
Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah, what is good in your world?
What is good in my world? Well, there's snow on the ground, which is always good. I live in Montana, and so we are often on fire. So the earlier the snow starts, the better.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I would say that's what's good in my world right now is the snow is on the ground as we're barreling toward holidays. It can at least feel like holiday time with the snow and the cold.
Mm-hmm. I did not know that Montana is frequently on fire.
Oh yeah,
and
always.
Wow, I'm glad to know that you enjoy the snow because not all of us do.
I don't know if I enjoy it, but I can appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So you are a million things. You are a coach. You're an owner. You're an advocate. There's a lot that you are into. Can you tell us just like a brief description of some of the roles that you play in the different worlds you're involved in?
I do. You're right. I wear a lot of different hats. Not only am I a mom and a wife, but that I also am a coach. Yep. So I'm a recovery coach specializing in the intersection of disordered eating and addiction, which often shows up then as ultra-processed food addiction or food addiction. I am a dual licensed mental health therapist and addictions counselor. I sit on 2 different committees in an attempt to respond to the rejection that we received from the World Health Organization. 3 years ago at this point, we petitioned or gave an application to have food addiction recognized by the World Health Organization. That was rejected. And so we've done this whole kind of like process to respond. So I sit on 2 different committees for that. I'm also part of a team that has started putting on international conferences around food addiction. So that's just to name a few. There are probably others, but those are the ones that really come to mind because I spend the most time doing those.
That is so amazing. So you're saying that when that rejection occurred 3 years ago, you've been helping to launch a response that's already been years in the making.
Correct. Yes, because part of their rejection was that, one of the things was that there wasn't like enough evidence and that it was still like a very like controversial idea. So we've spent time collecting because more and more research literature is being published all the time. I'm right now working on what is the latest research that's been published since 2021 to date. And there's over 400 research literature documents that
Wow.
I've found so far. And that was just in 12 hours of searching. So if I do another 12, I'd be amazed what I'm going to find. And the other part of that rejection was that there wasn't consensus amongst, the research or the researchers and the academics. And so we spent a year actually putting together researchers and academics. We've hunted them down worldwide and we put them in small groups to come to consensus on this concept of food addiction and what to call it and how it's to be defined and what research does exist and what research is still needed, next steps, all of that. So yeah, it's quite the process to get something like this recognized. You would think it would be a lot more simple, especially because of all the social media and just media in general, something like food addiction has gotten lately. But it's not that simple, unfortunately, but we're working on it.
When do you anticipate that you will be ready to actually launch your response or
Yeah.
create your campaign in response?
So Ashley Gerhardt, who developed the Yale Food Addiction Scale in the early 2000s, she actually has a team who has submitted an application to the American Psychiatric Association for recognition in the DSM. And they've already received a bit of a response. They're making corrections or changing things or responding, and they're sending things back. So we expect to hear from that end of things. That is not a committee I'm on, but that we're aware of the goings on. We try to collaborate where we can. They expect a response early in 2025. Our team hopes to have this all put together and resubmitted by spring. I think by May is right now our timeline that we're looking at for our final kind of like whole big response to be submitted to the World Health Organization.
Would it be possible that one organization would accept food addiction as a formidable diagnosis while the other organization does not?
Yes, that is actually something that happens. So, for example, the World Health Organization, so in the ICD or the International Classification of Diseases, there is recognition of sex addiction, but the DSM does not recognize it. So that can happen, but the hopes are that if there is recognition from the American Psychiatric Association, that we can take whatever kind of like arguments against it that they might have had and use that to just further bolster our response to our initial rejection. And hopefully they will, if there's momentum on one side, they might consider that for themselves when they're reconsidering. Yeah, so that's the hope.
That's such important work. That is super, super exciting. And I love that you're really spearheading this or being part of this organization to move this forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's exciting, but the work can be pretty tedious at times, as you can imagine, like digging through research, getting together with meetings and just like having to continually have meetings to like make sure people are, it's sometimes it can be like herding cats because we all have lives. Like this is something we're volunteering to do outside of our normal regular lives. And not to mention, then we're like trying to get people who research and, we're talking PhD level people who run labs and, teach in universities. And so to get everybody together, to keep everybody on task and on track for some of these timelines can be a little hectic sometimes, but it is a lot of fun at the end of the day. Yeah.
One thing that I want to ask you about is the many facets of recovery. You have a unique specialty in that you're dual licensed in mental health and addictions. And recovery, especially with food addiction, requires a lot. There's the food component, there's support component, there's what might be underneath it, maybe trauma, maybe a need to learn how to emotionally regulate better. There is a lot of possible things that can contribute to someone having these compulsive eating patterns. How do you assess what it is that a client of yours needs to work on?
So I take a really unique approach when it comes to the food addiction world because I do work internationally and I'm only licensed in Montana. It means that I really have to be careful about crossing legal and ethical boundaries. So in the recovery coaching world, I just have to be sure I don't cross into that world of therapy. And so really the best way to do that is I take on what's called solution-focused brief therapy techniques. And it's just a way of working with people that doesn't require me to like get to the root of the problem. I don't have to dig down. And little Sally at 5 years old had this really terrible thing happen. And that's kind of the thing that launched everything. So the best part is when people come to me and they say, I have this problem and I'm naming it food addiction or sugar addiction or whatever it might be, I get to just believe them, right? Like that's the beautiful part of my job is I just get to believe people where maybe they have been disbelieved or even told that's not real or that's not a thing or everything in moderation. They've been told a lot of things. I'm not that person that ever in their life has to show up and do that kind of thing. So I don't have to assess what they need. They get to show up and tell me what they need. So each session is really centered around strengths, things that are going well. And then the working part of the session, if you will, is really about what do you need to leave here today with to know it's been time well spent. So if I never see you again, what do you need to leave here with to know you're working yourself in that direction that you want to be going? You are on that trajectory to whatever that like preferred future is. So I don't actually ever have to do that. Now, that being said, when we work in group settings and we do a lot of education kind of stuff in our community of sweet sobriety, we do work in that cognitive behavioral motivational interviewing world a lot. And so that can come with a little more psychoeducation, a little bit more direction than when I'm working with somebody individually in that solution focused place. I guess for me, and this is maybe like too much of a woo-woo answer, but I've been in the field for 20 years. And so I have a lot of, right, like I like to call it my educated intuition. So like I'm kind of always listening for what are the things that are like alerting me to like this person's meeting criteria for this or meeting criteria for that, or, you know, kind of formulating and trying to understand the patterns. I really love pattern recognition. And that's a lot of what mental health therapy is about, is pattern recognition and helping others recognize those patterns as well. And then decide if that's a pattern that's working for me or not working for me. So, you know, we can use things like the Yale Food Addiction Scale or a modified version of it. We can use assessments like CRAVED or the EDEQ or something, you know, Beck depression or anxiety. We can use all of those things if it helps somebody to feel better. But at the end of the day, it isn't going to be the thing that actually makes them better. So I really rather focus on that, which is why I love the solution focused approach so much. Yeah, because we don't have to even worry about like, what is the thing? It's just, what would you rather have happen right now or in that near preferred future? And how do we get you there?
That sounds like you have a really intuitive sense, you know, from all your experience and also just understanding, you know, the parameters of being a coach. I love that it's very present moment focused and not necessarily having to dive back into like, tell me about what happened when you were 3 years old. It's like, let's talk about now. What do you need right now? And how can we get you there?
Yeah. And not that other stuff, you know, I don't want to like minimize that other stuff. There is a time and a place for that work. It's not necessarily with me though. Maybe if you were physically in Montana and you said like, hey, Molly, like this stuff really is coming up and, you know, it's legally and ethically like within your like wheelhouse to do that, I would do that work then with somebody. But oftentimes what ends up happening is because I am, you know, I do wear those hats, I can say, you know, I'm hearing these things and I really wonder if we need to bring another person or people onto your support team. And here's like what I would recommend. In fact, I love helping people find those people too, to make sure it's a good fit for them.
Yeah, I love that. You support people in their journey, in helping them become empowered and self-determined. And I had heard you talk somewhere else about self-determination and just really loved it. So I'm wondering if you could fill me in and fill in any listeners or anyone who might be watching the channel on what is the role of self-determination in recovery.
I think the reason why I love self-determination is because I love empowering people. They don't even have to be my clients. I was an advocate for years. I still feel like an advocate a lot of the time. I feel like in my profession, I have to be. And self-determination is just so empowering because it fosters autonomy. So like what that means then is that like we're more likely to make choices that really like line up with our personal values. Like we have to listen to the internal voice. Like, does this make sense to me? What's important to me? Do I value family over money, or maybe I value making money over, I don't know, childcare. And that's okay. It's about making those decisions that really line up with your values and quieting the noise out there. There's so much noise out there, and the diet culture is pervasive everywhere. We even hear it in the loudest voices in the, that talk about the way of eating that can be really helpful for people who are recovering from food addiction. But when it becomes like rhetoric, that can really get hard then to listen, because we can be so easily swayed. We're so vulnerable, especially early days. So I love self-determination because it fosters that autonomy. I also love because it helps to build that intrinsic motivation. So, which means I'm just motivated by stuff that's inside of me versus the outside world. It's not because my doctor is saying I need to lose weight, or because my significant other is like, gee, honey, you've really gotten chunky lately. Like, those things are not necessarily bad motivators. I don't want to label it that way. So if you're a person who is externally motivated, that's okay. But when we learn to have that internal motivation, we actually are more likely to stick with it long term, because it actually becomes like those lifestyle changes that are necessary. Those external motivations are temporary. They're more like, oh, I want to lose weight for my son's wedding. And then the wedding comes and goes, and we've decided to indulge in the cake and the wine or the champagne or whatever. And now, like, all bets are off and we're right back to doing what we were doing, the year prior before we decided to start this diet, for the wedding. So when it's those intrinsic motivators, like internal, I just want to feel better. I want to be able to get down and back off the ground with my children or my grandchildren. I want to be able to, hike a mountain. I want to be able to get my own groceries into my house when I'm 80. Those kinds of things are going to have longer lasting impact. I also love it because self-determination is really about personal responsibility, and personal responsibility is so important in recovery, because here's the thing, folks, whether it's mental health disorders, whether it's substance use disorders, whatever disorder it is not your fault. You did not do anything to cause that, but it is your responsibility to take care of it. So if you are sick with cancer, it wasn't your fault you got cancer. It is your responsibility to take care of it in whatever way that makes sense for you. So taking that personal responsibility and saying, hey, maybe I need to go get a coach, or maybe I need to go to meetings, or maybe I need to read a book. Maybe I need to pick up Vera's Food Junkies or Molly Carmel's Breaking Up with Sugar, or, whatever. Like, maybe I need to listen to a podcast, something like that. It also helps us to feel more competent, because when we're self-determined and we're making these decisions that line up with us and we're taking personal responsibility, and then when we're successful, we feel more competent, which then just increases our self-esteem, right? It just feeds into itself, which again, keeps that more likely, feeling of this is going to be something I can do for the rest of my life, or for a significant period in my life until something comes along and requires change, because nothing is ever permanent. I mean, life things happen. We change, we grow, especially with self-determination. Often one of those internal rewards that we get is personal growth. We outgrow things, and then we have to be flexible enough in our thinking to know that's okay. Self-determination also helps with resilience. So if I'm making choices, I feel empowered. So then I feel less like a victim of circumstance. So I'm more likely to bounce back from, hardships along the way. It can help us to feel more connected to others. Self-determination does, because it can't happen in isolation. It always happens in relationship. When I'm having a conversation with you, Christina, you're asking me a question, I get to decide how I'm going to answer that, how I'm going to represent myself. And so that helps us to relate. I mean, you're nodding your head as I'm speaking. That encourages me, right? So that makes me feel good. I'm feeling validated. You understand where I'm coming from. I'm making sense. So that can be really helpful too on our recovery journey, especially when we've often felt so isolated. I think that it just allows us to have more meaningful goals in our life. It just helps us to really create a life that we don't want to, no longer want to escape from, right? We're not, because they're our goals. It wasn't somebody said, oh, you have to lose 20 pounds before, I'll give you knee surgery or whatever. It's we get to determine what those goals are. And so it just makes life just that much more rich. And the buy-in from us into it is just so much more than it would be if somebody said you have to do this thing in this, short amount of time. So yeah, I mean, I think self-determination is super important, and I think it plays a huge role in recovery, no matter recovery from what? You know, it doesn't matter
Right,
what it's from.
right.
It really plays a role. You know, it could be from knee surgery and now you're in recovery from knee surgery. Self-determination helps you to just feel, you know, when somebody's like, oh, you have to go to PT every week for a year, that can get really old. But if you're a part of that treatment planning process, you're going to have more buy-in. So that's why I love self-determination in recovery. And we encourage all of our clients, whether they're individual or in group, all the time to get on board with self-determination. But it can be really hard and really scary because I'm asking you to listen to your voice, and you've been told over and over and over again, you can't trust yourself. Your best thinking is what got you here. There's so much shaming out there in the world and stigma that's told you that you can't trust yourself. And then I come along and I'm like, nope, we're going to trust ourselves. And it can be so dysregulating and so scary. And I just want to acknowledge that, like, I get it. I see you. I've been in your shoes. And I promise you, I'm never going to ask you to do anything you don't really want to do and or that I haven't done myself, you know? So that's, I guess that's just really why I love self-determination.
Oh my gosh. Oh, if I could have some angel singing effects, we'll see if we could get that in there. But like, you just dropped so many incredible gems. Like, your messages are wonderful. They just resonate so much with me. Those messages are extremely powerful. I mean, and it goes along with everything that you just said, self-determination. If you don't have it, then motivation might be temporary. And it's really, you have to be, for something as that could be potentially as exhausting as painstaking and long as the recovery journey, you really have to have buy-in, personal buy-in, and take responsibility. You can't just blame someone else or expect someone to fix you. But if you can take responsibility and be like, okay, who's gonna fix me? Better look in the mirror, you know, and be willing to be open, curious, compassionate, and take that journey, you will get there. It might take you, you know, a million times falling and 1,000,001 times getting up, but you can get there. But that's why you need that self-determination. But it's a crucial element, and you just explained it so incredibly. So thank you for sharing all those gems.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I hope it resonates with somebody, you know. And again, like, I think the thing about self-determination is we don't even have to go. Now, if you are like more of a person who needs that direct kind of like information, yeah, that look in the mirror, like, you're the one, babe. Like, if you want anybody to save you, you're it. But also, like, if you're not that person and that feels too, you know, harsh, or like just it doesn't line up for you, you know, I invite you to even just get curious about, like, could you be the person? Mm-hmm. Could you be the one that actually finds the way for you? We start to lose our power as soon as we've decided, oh, this doctor is going to be able to help me. And then they're like, yep, I've got nothing for you. Go try out, go check this other thing. Then you go to the next person. They're like, yep, I've got nothing for you. Or they can only do like this little bit, right? Like this
or they
one
say,
piece
do this, and then it doesn't work.
And then it doesn't work. Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Exactly. That's the other hard part about it, where when we practice self-determination, or we grow our self-determination, we really like use that as the framework through which we live. We don't have to be, you know what I mean? Like, we're still going to have those moments where we have to go ask, like, quote unquote, the expert. But when it comes to recovery, and again, it doesn't matter what it's from, you are the expert in you. And that's like the epitome of self-determination. And I love that so much because I get to remember, like, wait a minute, I'm the expert in me. So no matter what that doctor is telling me, or that coach is telling me, or that therapist is telling me, I actually don't have to do those things. If it doesn't make sense for me, I get to ask myself, what is my truth? And does that actually work for me? Is that something that I want to try and willing to try? And if not, is there something else? Can I go back and have a conversation with them? Like, listen, I thought about it. It's not going to work for me here. And it doesn't even matter why. I don't have to explain myself. It's not going to work for me. Let's talk about something else. Like, can we collaborate? Can we find another way?
This leads me into a question I have. I'm gonna say 3 questions, but they're kind of the same thing, but said different ways.
Sure.
Okay. Is there anything in your recovery that you've done that doesn't align with best practices? Said in another way, is there any popular advice for recovery that hasn't really tracked for you? Said in another way, what is an unconventional take that has really worked for you? So this kind of relates to that self-determination. Like, let's, whatever works for you. Like, has there been anything that's like, oh, do this for recovery? And you're like, no. But there's something that you've done that's like not the normal advice, but it's like really worked for you.
Yeah, I would say a common piece of advice that is often given in the recovery world is to go join 12 steps.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 12 steps works for who it works for. I happen to be one of those people it doesn't work for. And I think it's just my special brand of trauma. Ultimately, I really do. And probably mixed with who I am as a person, though, too.
Yeah.
I think I've always been a little bit of a rebel, a little bit of a questioner, just because somebody is in a place of authority doesn't mean that, you're right 100% of the time. Now, that can get me into trouble. Don't get me wrong. That can absolutely get me into trouble. But I think because of that, 12 steps has never really worked for me. So that's something that I would say I'm a bit of a disruptor. Like if it works for you and my clients, when it works for my clients, I definitely support them in it. I've worked the 12 steps. I can speak the lingo, it's helped many, many people. I would say the thing that's really out of the box. So I've tried it all. I've done talk therapy for 2 decades. I've done EMDR. I've done somatic practices. I've done neurofeedback. And some of those things have been really powerful and have definitely, every one of those things has moved me along on my recovery journey. And then the thing that I tried that was so out of the box that I think was like the most powerful for me on my journey was I did go and do a therapeutic dose of psilocybin with a professional in a very structured way. There's a protocol before, during, after, and then, for several weeks and months beyond as well. And that was probably to date, one of the most life-changing experiences and things I've ever done for my recovery, because it just allowed me to see things differently that I couldn't see differently in 2 decades. Now, I think all that stuff I did prior set me up to have such a good experience. I really do. Because I didn't go into it super I wasn't in crisis. I wasn't super dysregulated going into it. It was like intentional. I knew the very things I wanted to work on, and those things were addressed. And so it was really beautiful. The neurofeedback was also very life-changing for me, I have to admit. So, had I been asked that question and not had psilocybin, had the psilocybin experience, I just said neurofeedback is the thing. I felt like a different person. The psilocybin just tipped it. So yeah, I would say don't be afraid to think outside of the box, but also do those things with support. I talked to my therapist, I talked to my husband, I talked to Clarissa Kennedy, my partner in crime, we like to say. I talked to people before I did it, kind of deal. So there's lots of options out there for you though. And I'm the kind of person who really likes to think outside of the box. I love like doing off the wall stuff. I just think we live in so much fear, and I'm all about love and curiosity and all of those things. And I think fear just holds us back so often from doing the things that actually would be beneficial to us, because society or somewhere along the way, somebody decided like, that's not right. Well, who's to say that's not right for everybody?
Absolutely. I share those values. I definitely like to think outside the box, and so you're my type of gal. Thanks for sharing those the unconventional takes that have and have not worked for you.
Definitely.
As we mentioned before, you wear many hats. You're a busy gal. You have you and Clarissa, you co-founded Sweet Sobriety. You guys also co-host an amazing podcast yourselves called Food Junkies, and I just found out you guys are launching or have launched another podcast called Food Shrinks. Tell us about Food Shrinks, or tell us about everything, but particularly tell us about this new podcast, because that is new, fresh, and exciting.
Yeah. So Food Junkies is definitely our baby. We started recording in late 2020 with Dr. Vera Tarman. It's named after her book. And it's really this labor of love as far as, we've really set the foundation for what is food addiction. And now we're really into how do you treat it? And we're starting to get into some of the more unconventional stuff. So Food Junkies is really more it's for people who want to hear more of the science and the, kind of the nitty gritty. They want to hear from the experts in those particular fields. We've talked to people about grief, and we've talked to people about ADHD and trauma and that kind of stuff. So if you want to hear, that's that podcast. Food Shrinks, Clarissa and I teamed up with Molly Carmel, who wrote Breaking Up with Sugar, and who has been, just a powerhouse in this field for years. And we teamed up with her for Food Shrinks. And really what it is it's 3 friends who work in this field who all wear multiple hats, but we all have very different takes, and maybe not super different, but we do have different takes on these different things that we're talking about. But we all get along. We all like find that we have the same goal for our clients or ourselves. We just have a different approach to it. And so it's kind of this fun way to like behind the scenes, you hear about our strengths and our, struggles. You hear about, how we approach different things. You hear about like our personal opinions on stuff. So it's really just more kind of like behind the scenes as professionals in the field, working in mental health and addictions, like kind of like that, like just best friends hanging out, having a chit chat, so it's fun. It's super fun because we're not, we don't have to prepare for an expert. We don't have to get interview questions together. We don't have to read a bunch of material. And again, I'm not complaining about that. I do love that aspect of things. And it's really nice to have the flip of that where we just get to like be free to say our truth.
That sounds really wonderful. We will have to check it out. We'll include a link for everything that you are involved in. We'll include all of that in the show description.
Awesome. Yay.
If people want to follow you, be abreast of everything, what are the best? I know you guys have several. I know you and Clarissa have several websites. What's the best way for people to follow you and Clarissa? Your podcast? What is the best way to stay abreast?
Yeah, I think ultimately the best thing to do is just to go to our website, www.sweetsobriety.ca. Okay. Because from there, then you can get the links to YouTube, to Instagram, to Facebook, all of that. We are often in Vera's Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life, I'm Sweet Enough. We are moderators and admins in there. So we're often in there. Honestly, for both of us, if you go to our website, you'll get our email. Email is a really great way to get a hold of us. But honestly, I'm the only Molly Painschab in the world. If you Google me and you get the spelling of my name correctly, it's me. And so you can Instagram message me, Facebook message me, WhatsApp, whatever. Honestly, my life is virtual these days. And so it syncs to all my devices. And if anybody's trying to get a hold of Clarissa and they can't find that information, but you can find my information, get a hold of me, I can forward that on to her. We do that all the time for each other. Not a problem at all. But I promise, Google me, you'll find me.
Great. Thank you, Molly. It has been such a delight to have you. You are just a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I just appreciate everything that you've had to share with us today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you again for having me. It's been fun.